I'm sitting here editing this video. I'm probably going to cry. And I'm probably going to cry because how did I not notice I had a stain on my shirt for the whole video? I rewatched it as I was filming it a few times and I didn't notice until just now. So that's very typical Jackie. I cannot keep a shirt clean. And today I'm going to talk about two of my favorite, very misunderstood topics: feelings and emotions. And these are two of my greatest passions, and I believe that they are so misunderstood because they are so unique to each individual, and how we feel and how we process emotions is all so very different. And when it comes to feelings and emotions, the main thing that we do have in common is that not many of us ever learn how to process our emotions. So we're all kind of just out here, not knowing what's going on, not knowing what we're feeling, which keeps us in these perpetual loops, unless we take the time to develop emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is really just knowing yourself and how you process emotions. And once you know yourself and understand how you feel and process those feelings, you're able to understand everyone else, and you're able to find compassion for everyone else in their emotions and in their feelings. And when you're able to do that, life becomes a whole lot easier. You know, each of us feel very differently. For me, I feel very deeply. So no matter what emotions I'm feeling, whether it's happiness or sadness or anger, frustration, gratuity, any of those emotions that overcome me, I process and ultimately release those feelings through crying, through tears. And this video, being my first real video, was so important to me because my tears, and tears in general, not just mine, they're so misunderstood. And I titled this, "I'm Probably Going to Cry," because I'm probably going to cry. You guessed it right. And many times I cry not because I'm sad or grieving, but because I'm so very deeply grateful. And even just to have the awareness that this is how I process my feelings and this is how I identify my emotions is something to be so grateful for, that even that in itself can bring me to tears. I know that oftentimes my tears, and again, tears in general, can make people uncomfortable. And their initial reaction is to believe that I'm sad or that something's wrong. They get protective. What's the matter? What's wrong? Is everything okay? And I say I'm probably going to cry because in these videos that I make, I'm probably going to cry. I wanted to make sure that everyone understands that most often my tears are not coming from a place of sadness. There's nothing wrong with crying. There's nothing wrong with my tears. And when it comes to the idea of feelings, I think it's very important to note this fact, that feelings only take about 90 seconds to feel and then they pass. And that's not something that I made up. That there's doctors who have studied that. You can go on Google and Google it. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that after 90 seconds you're going to heal your childhood trauma, your fears, or your insecurities. But the saying goes, you have to feel it to heal it for a reason. If you don't allow those feelings to run their 90-second course, you will have a very hard time trying to heal those wounds. And even worse, alternatively, feelings that we don't allow to run their 90 seconds, they store in the body, sometimes forever. We've all heard that emotions store in the hips. Many of us, myself included, we got some tight hips. We got some shit stored in there, you know, from times that we've pushed those feelings away. And most of us, again, myself included, we waste so many years avoiding feelings and hold on to it and suffer needlessly and sometimes endlessly until our deathbed just to avoid feeling 90 seconds of discomfort. I haven't decided how much detail I'm going to go into about the next thing that I'm going to share. It's something that's very personal to me, but I do need to touch on it for the purpose of this video. When I was 9 years old, I experienced a very difficult childhood trauma at school. And subsequently, I started having a ton of very uncomfortable feelings come up. And I started having crazy nightmares, to the point that one time I was screaming so loudly in my sleep that my parents thought that I was experiencing some kind of physical pain, that maybe the ceiling fan had fallen off the ceiling and onto me. My parents did what any loving and caring parents would do. I have the two greatest parents in the world. I am so grateful for my parents. I know that not many people are as lucky as I am when it comes to the parent department, that my gratuity for my parents brings me to tears, because I'm very lucky to have my parents as my parents. And they tried to ease their child's pain, and they brought me to different therapists and psychologists, and instead of helping me work through my pain, the therapists and the doctors, they turned my pain off. I didn't dream anymore. I didn't really feel much anymore. And if I did start to feel, I had a new skill of how to push that pain away. And I created a story in my mind. And we all know this story. It's a very common societal story that crying and feeling is a form of weakness. And I wanted to be strong. So I created a story in my mind that strong people don't cry and they don't feel deeply. And that little girl, my inner child, that baby Jackie, she turned her tears off. And I honestly couldn't tell you any time that I cried, from elementary school up until a few years ago. For the majority of my adult life, I barely cried. I didn't really feel much. I experienced heartbreaks and setbacks, and I had businesses fail and people screw me over, and even when my cousin passed away in 2018, I couldn't cry. I just stored all of those emotions, tucking them away, because I identified as a strong woman. And strong people don't cry. Or that's the story that I was telling myself. That's the story that was in my head. And the first time that I remember crying in recent years, I was on a spiritual and yoga retreat with Natasha Nassar and Dr. Sanaa Jaman in Morocco in 2019. I'm going to place a link to the retreat in the description below. They are hosting another Desert Rose retreat later on this year, in case anyone is interested. And in the space that those two women, as well as the other attendees of the retreat, held, it allowed me to understand how my childhood trauma, my inner child wound, shaped me, and how those stories from that childhood trauma were just that. They were stories. And in that space, I allowed myself to be vulnerable for the first time in 2 decades, and I cried, and I did not stop. I cried for the whole day, and all of the emotions that had been built up for years, for decades, just started pouring out. The next day I felt like I got hit by a truck. I felt like I got hit by a truck that pushed me onto train tracks, and then I got ran over by a train. My whole body hurt. I couldn't move. I could barely get out of bed, and I actually spent the entire day in that bed, in that hotel. The only time I got up was to answer the door for room service, which I ordered room service for every meal that day. But the day after that, I felt better. I felt lighter. And literally every single day since then has been easier as well. And the Desert Rose retreat opened my eyes to the stories I was telling myself for so long, and it showed me how I needed to start processing my feelings differently, or literally just start processing them at all. And it also opened the floodgates to let a lot of shit out that I had been storing and holding on to for so long. And since then, doing the work to reverse those patterns and tell myself new stories has been a whole other level of learning and healing and feeling. I had created such a strong habit and pattern of running away from my feelings that it was hard for me not to revert to those same patterns when uncomfortable feelings started to work their way up and out of me. Learning to sit in that discomfort has been a whole second journey in itself. And I know that this is going to look differently for everyone. As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, feelings are so misunderstood because they're so different for all of us. But I wanted to share the way that I create an environment to allow my feelings to come up. And I think that this will be especially handy for men because society has been telling men, even boys, little boys don't cry. They've been telling them this false story that they can't cry or that it's a sign of weakness for far longer than I had that story. And I really believe that the men just need to cry it out. As a side note, there is a coach named Jason Wilson, and I'm going to link him below because the work he's doing with young men is just so beautiful. He creates a safe space for boys to learn how to process their feelings and to cry. And the other day he tweeted, what did he call it? Giving boys the freedom to be the lamb while empowering them to be the lion. Whew. That is just so profound because what I've learned from my feelings is that there is a power and a strength in vulnerability that cannot be found elsewhere. And I love to see men cultivating that strength through their vulnerabilities. And okay, I'm deviating. Back to feeling our feelings, and a practice that has worked really well for me. Because we all know that feeling we get. It starts in our gut, sometimes it starts in our heart, and it moves up to our throat. You know that feeling in your throat when you're about to cry. And when it comes up, you have two choices. You either let it out and you feel it, or you swallow it and it goes away. For me, that feeling was getting stuck in my throat. I knew that I didn't want to push it away, and I also didn't know how not to. I had created a reflex to push it down. I had created a pattern of shoving it away. So it would come up and I would feel it, and I would know that I didn't want to live this old story anymore. And I knew that I wanted to let it come up, but I had a hard time allowing it to. So I had to learn to create an environment where it was safe for me to be vulnerable, for me to be comfortable in my discomfort. Now, the time that I was doing this work was during COVID, and I lived alone. So my space couldn't have been any more prime for me to do this work. But I was still so incredibly uncomfortable in my own feelings that I couldn't let them come up, even in my own home, even in my own energy. And again, it's COVID, so I'm not seeing anyone. No one's coming over. I literally could not have been any more in my own energy than I was. And then I got the nudge to get naked. No, I promise this isn't going left, I swear. But, to be naked is to be vulnerable. As vulnerable and as raw as the moment that we are born. And I really just followed my intuition, and it guided me into the bathroom. And I turned the shower on. And I didn't let the water be hot and comfortable, what I was used to. I made it lukewarm and maybe even almost cold. And then I turned off the lights, taking away the comfort of being able to see. And I didn't stand in the shower when I got in the shower, because that's what I'm used to doing. There's comfortability and familiarity in that. Instead, I sat on the floor of the shower in this dark, kind of lukewarm, coldish water, and I allowed myself to be vulnerable in the most vulnerable environment that I could concoct. And in that environment, again, the feelings just poured out of me, and I remember it like it was yesterday. I sobbed, and I even yelled, and I had one of those really audible cries, like, like, and it only lasted a few minutes. And again, just like in Morocco, it hurt a bit. But then the next day, it was easier, lighter. And every day since then has been easier. And I've returned to the shower a few times since then. Even last year, now years after I learned how to feel and long after I was comfortable in my discomfort, I had to return to the shower, sitting on the floor of the shower in the cottage that I was renting and living in Tuscany, because so much shit had hit the fan with my move to Italy, which is a different story for a different day. I will talk about how I moved to Italy and then moved home a few months later. But I found myself having to bring up the feelings of disappointment that I was feeling. And I was having a difficult time allowing those feelings to arise because those feelings were internal. They weren't feelings of sadness because my boyfriend cheated on me or feelings of grief because my cousin passed away. They were feelings of disappointment in myself. And that was a really hard thing to allow to come up. And it was a whole other level of feelings that I had to learn how to process. And I mentioned this in my intro video. This work is forever. There's no point where we get to kick back and say, okay, I'm done learning, I'm done growing, I'm done evolving, I'm a master at everything, and there's nothing else on this planet that I need to learn. But to show up is the work. To try a bit harder each time is the work. To learn how to navigate your own emotions and feel what you're feeling is the work. Learning how to navigate and feel my feelings has been so beautiful for my growth as a person. And if you ask the people around me, the people that really know me, they will tell you how much I've grown, especially over the last 3 years. And a massive amount of that growth comes not from learning anything external about anyone else or anything else. It comes from learning about myself, from learning how to feel my feelings, and learning how to identify and process my own emotions. Accepting that I feel so deeply and that I am a very emotional person also broke the illusion that I couldn't be strong and soft at the same time. I learned that there is nothing wrong with being emotional, and that strength and vulnerability can coexist in the same person. And learning that there is an extreme strength in vulnerability itself has helped me to start processing feelings and emotions differently. In that knowledge, I also opened my mind to a bigger kind of world where two facts can both be true at the same time. And it really shifted my entire perspective of the world in general, which is really such an interesting thing. Something that I learned about myself helped me to view the world differently. I'm deviating again. That's not even a whole other video. That's a whole other series. So I'm going to end it on that note. Thank you for coming back to my channel. Thank you for allowing me to cry. Thank you for allowing me to be vulnerable. I'm forever grateful for any space that allows me to just be myself. My name is Jackie, and I will be putting out new videos every week, so click the subscribe button below. You can also find me on social media at JackieIsAlive on everything, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, or on my website, JackieIsAlive.com. Social media and my website are two places that I will go more in depth kind of into some of the topics that I'll be discussing here, so you can find me there if you want to discuss, or you can drop a comment below and we can have a dialogue. So yeah, thank you again. I will see you next week.